hours till I land, have me out like a light, like a light, like a light, slept through the flight, not for the night.
Yo guys, welcome back to my channel, and in today's video I'm going to be telling you guys the best build for every single brawler, including Maple. Before we start this video, please make sure you like the video right now. Please make sure you subscribe, as I'm getting very close to 600 subscribers, and please join my Discord server. It's in the description down below if you want to be featured in future videos. Let's start off with Shelly. So for Shelly, it's actually pretty simple. You gotta go with the clay pigeon star power gadget. It's the best one for her. The other one, fast forward, is just not that great in any situation, so you gotta go with clay pigeons. And for the star power, it really does depend. If it's solo showdown, then I do recommend you going band 8, but if it's a longer range maps or you're facing against tanks, then you have to go with shell shock. And for the gears, you gotta go with damage gear and the gadget gear, but if it's in a bushy map, you have to go with the speed gear and the damage gear. So for the next brawler, of course, we're gonna go with Nita. So for Nita, you have to go with this gadget right here that I do not know how to spell. So it gets you 35% shield, the bear, for 3 seconds. It's very good in a lot of scenarios. This one, if you're very skilled with Nita and you know how to time it correctly, then you have to definitely go with this one. But if you're not, then I don't recommend you using this. And then you have to go with Bear With Me. Unless it's heist, for heist you have to go with Hyper Bear, but for most scenarios you have to go with Bear With Me. And for the gears, you have to go with the damage gear and the pet power gear. But if it's a bushy map, of course you gotta go with the speed gear, and it's either the damage gear or the pet power gear if you want to go with. Now we got with Colt. With Colt you have to go with speed loader, but if it's a map with a lot of walls and you want to destroy the walls, you gotta go with silver bullet. All case scenarios, you have to go with this Magnum special star power. It's the best one there. And for Colt, it really does depend really. If it's control based like hot zone and stuff like that, you gotta go with maybe the damage gear, shield gear. But if it's heist where you're gonna mostly use them, you gotta go with the reload gear and the damage gear. Next up we got Bull. For Bull, you gotta go with T-bone injector. But if you're a very good ball player and you don't really need, getting a lot of health, then you can definitely go with Stomper, but I do recommend going T-bone injector. If it's heist, then you have to go with Berserk star power, but if it's not heist, you gotta go with Tough Guy. For the gears, you have to go with the health gear, and then you have to also go with the damage gear. That's the best one for Bull. Next up we got Brock. For Brock, if you're going against assassins and you're just not really comfortable with them, you can go with rocket laces, not even against assassins like snipers like Nani or the Piper gadget. You can definitely go with rocket laces, but if you want to break up more walls in the map, then you can go with rocket fuel. Every case scenario you have to go with more rockets. And then for the gears, you have to go with the reload gear or damage gear, but if you want more health, then you can definitely go with the damage gear and the shield gear. For El Primo, if you want to break open the maps a little more, go with Asteroid Belt, but if you don't, then you have to go with supplements, yeah, that's what it's called. And every case scenario you have to go with El Fuego. 1800 damage is so much, and especially for 4 seconds you're keep doing damage over time and they're not healing. That's really good for you. And then you have to go with the, of course, health gear and damage gear, but if it's a bushy map, you definitely could go with the speed gear or the health gear. And if you want more damage, you can go with the speed gear and the damage gear. For Barley, it's pretty simple. Assassins, if you're facing against them, you gotta go with Sticky Syrup Mixer. But if you're not facing against assassins, you gotta go with this health gadget, Herbal Tonics. Then every case scenario you have to go with this one that gives you 200 more damage to your hit. And then obviously with the gears, gotta go damage and shield gear. For Poco, it's pretty simple. Tuning fork, you have to go with every single time. But if you're facing against brawlers that are stunned like Frank, then you can definitely go with protective tunes. Then obviously if you're going Poco double tank, or you have a tank and you want to heal them, go with the capo, but most case scenario you have to go with Screeching Solo. And for the gears, if it's a bushy map, a speed gear and damage gear every single time. If it's not a bushy map, I recommend you going with the damage gear and the gadget gear. For Rosa, if it's not really a bushy map and you want to create a bushy map, you have to go with Grow Light and the speed gear. But if it's not really a bushy map, then you have to go with unfriendly bushes, because why not? But if it's actually a bushy map, you gotta go with unfriendly bushes with the speed gear. If you want to make it a bushy map, you have to go with grow light and speed gear. And obviously, back in the days, plant life was good, but now you gotta go with thorny gloves. The gears, you gotta go speed and damage, but if it's not a bushy map, health and damage. You could also go with the gadget gear and damage gear. So, for most case scenarios, you have to go with Spark Plug because it's the best one. You can easily get confirmed kills, you can slow them down, you can get a lot of control and pressure. But if it's heist, you have to go with Recoiling Spring. And obviously, you have to go with Energize every single time, damage gear and the pet power gear. And then next up we got Dynamite. Obviously you gotta go with Satchel Charge, even though Fidget Spinner keeps getting buffed over and over a couple months ago. Still, Satchel Charge is the best one in the game. Next up we got Demolishment or Demolish Litman, whatever it's called. You gotta go with this one. You can get easy kills, you can do a lot of damage, a lot of pressure and a lot of control. Damage gear and shield gear obviously is the one to go, but maybe you could also go with the gadget charge gear and the damage gear to get that gadget more. Next up, obviously we gotta go with Last Hurrah. Is the best one for tech. You can easily push assassins away and try and survive a bit longer. You have to also go with this tick reload star power, because tick's reload is so long, it takes so long for you to get an ammo, so I do recommend going this. You have to also go with the damage gear and the shield gear, but most case scenarios I do recommend you using this gadget right here, the mythic gear. Sometimes you can go with the mythic gear or shield gear or mythic gear or damage gear, that's up to you. Next up we got 8-bit. Obviously you have to go with extra credits in heist, but if it's not heist you have to go with cheat cartridge. And then it really does depend on what star power you want to use. I use boosted boosters to get more damage because I don't really need the speed, because the speed doesn't really help me too much. So yeah, this is completely up to you what you want to do. You have to go with the reload gear and the damage gear if you're playing in heist, but if it's not heist, I recommend you using the reload gear, health gear or speed gear, reload gear if it's a bushy map. Next up we got Rico. Rico, it's very simple, multi-ball launcher. Even though I got nerfed like a couple of updates ago, it's still the best one so far. But if there's a lot of walls and you need heals, then you can definitely go with Bouncy Castle. Star power, you have to go with Super Bouncy all the way with the damage gear and reload gear. But if you need shield, and if you're facing against Pipers and Nanis that do so much damage, you can definitely go with the damage gear, shield gear, or the reload gear and shield gear. Next up we got Daryl. For Daryl, it's Tar Barrel all the way. But if it's of course heist, you gotta go with Recoiling Rotator and of course Rolling Reload. But if it's not heist, you gotta go with Steel Hoops, Tar Barrel, the damage gear and health gear. But if it's a bushy map, you gotta go with speed gear and obviously the damage gear. For Penny, still a really good brawler in the meta right now. You gotta go with Salty Barrel. You gotta also go with Heavy Coffiner, because this doesn't really do much and you don't want to put a turret in a very bad place that they can easily destroy. So you gotta go with this one. And you get a lot of pressure and a lot of control with this star power. Obviously the damage gear is the best one to go because Penny doesn't do too much damage, and you have to go with the pet power gear. But if you're facing against like real damage dealers, then you can definitely go with the pet power and shield gear, or the damage gear and shield gear. Next up we got Carl. For Carl, you gotta go with Flying Hook. But if you want pressure and control, if you're playing like heist or something like that, where the map is not too long, then you can definitely go with the Heat Injector. But most case scenario, you have to go with Flying Hook. Protective Curate is the best one, but sometimes I feel like Carl's, throwing his axe is way too slow to come back to you. Then you can definitely go with Power Throw. And if you're a Carl main, you can definitely go with Power Throw. It's so much better for you. And then the gears, you gotta go with damage gear and gadget charge gear, because both of his gadgets are really important for him. Next up we got Jackie. We have to go with this boosters gadget because it's just so important for Jackie to get the first super and to get the hyper charge, and then just to keep destroying enemies. Then we have to go with Counter Crush. You can easily confirm kills way easy with this. This used to be good and it's still good, but I do recommend you going Counter Crush. The gears, you have to go with damage gear and gadget charge gear. Next up we got Gus. Gus is finally back in the meta, has been in the meta for so long now. You have to go with Cookie Poppers. This is just so useless. Even though it's 5% health, you lose it's still absolutely useless. Even if it's 0% health you lose, it's still useless. So you gotta go with Cookie Poppers. You have to obviously go with Spirit Animal. The damage increase is so much for Gus. If you're giving it to yourself, it's so much. If you're giving it to a teammate, they do so much damage. This is really good. I do recommend Supercell nerfing this star power to maybe 20%. Obviously the damage gear and shield gear is the way to go for Gus. Next up we got Bow. For Bow you have to go with super totem. I just don't really see tripwire being that good at all, so you definitely want to go with super totem. And if it's a bushy map, you definitely want to go with circling eagle. But if it's not a bushy map, you have to go with snare a bear. And for the gears, if it's a bushy map, speed, damage, or speed, reload. But if it's not a bushy map, you gotta go with reload and damage gear. Next up we got Ems. For Ems is very simple, friendly zoner. You gotta, it depends on the star power really. If you want more damage, if you're facing against real bad tanks, you definitely want to go with bad karma. And especially if you're playing in heist, you definitely want to go with bad karma. But if you're not really facing against tanks, then you do want to go with the hype star power. And for the gears, if it's a bushy map, which you definitely want to play Ems in, it's speed gear, damage gear. But if it's not a bushy map, then I do recommend you with the damage gear and the gadget charge gear. Next up we got Stu. Stu has been a very good brawler in the meta for so long, never has been really outside the top 15. So if it's Stu, if there's a lot of walls, or if there's a lot of walls that you want to break, then you definitely want to go with breakthrough. But if there's not too many walls and you want speed, then you gotta go with speed zone. And for the star power, you gotta go with Gaso Heal. Getting 640 health every Stu super is just very important, especially if you're a very good Stu main, or if you have good ping with Stu and you can keep on chaining it, you can get more than 2,000, maybe even 3,000 with the health from this star power. And for the gears, it's very simple. Damage gear, shield gear is very important to Stu's base kit. Next up we got Piper, and Piper is very simple. If you are facing against assassins, you need to go with auto aimer. But if it's no assassins at all, or brawlers that jump onto you or very close to you, you don't need this. But for bounty and knockout, and if you're facing against Byrons and Bells, you definitely want to go with the homemade recipe. For star power, if there's bushy maps or bushy maps that are very important in certain places, then you definitely want to go with ambush. But if there's barely any bushes, or you don't really need this star power, then you really want to go with snappy sniping. For the gears are pretty simple. If you're facing against aggressive brawlers and aggro brawlers, you definitely want to go with the gadget gear and the auto aimer. But if you need more shield and you're facing against like Nani or stuff like that, you definitely want to go with the shield gear and the damage gear. So yeah, for Pam, you definitely want to go with Scrap Sucker. That's the only reason why Pam is still like not F tier right now. And then obviously you gotta go with Mama Squeeze. The gear is pretty simple. You gotta go with the damage gear and the gadget gear. But if you are using speed, if you're having to play Pam in a bushy map, you definitely want to go with speed and gadget gear. Maybe you can also use damage gear with it, with the speed. Next up we got Frank. For Frank, it's pretty simple. If there is no brawlers that counter your super, then you definitely want to go with this gadget. But if there are brawlers that are countering your super or knocking you back, then you definitely want to go with active noise cancelling. It's pretty simple. You have to go with power grab every single time, and you have to go with the damage gear and health gear. Even if it's in a bushy map, you definitely need both of those. For BB, it's pretty simple. You gotta go with vitamin booster, you gotta go with batting stand, you gotta go with the damage gear and the gadget gear, because you need that health from BB. Next up, for B, if you're facing against brawlers like Piper or Nani, then you gotta go with Honey Molasses to at least get some shots off that. When Nani is shooting you or a Piper shot is coming, you can press this gadget and you get one shot off and you get protected. But if there's no such thing as that, if there's no Pipers in the enemy team or anything like that, and there's aggressive brawlers, then you have to go with Rattled Hive. Star power is pretty simple. You gotta go with Honeycomb star power. The gear is also very simple, damage gear and shield gear. Next up we got Nani. For Nani, if you're facing against Pipers, Bells, Byron, stuff like that, you gotta go with Return to Sender. But if you're playing him in heist, or you wanna get a cheeky TP and kill 2 or 1 enemies, then you definitely want to go with Wrapping Time. The star power is pretty simple. If you're facing against low HP brawlers like Tick, Piper, Grom, stuff like that, you definitely want to go with autofocus. But if it's not that, you definitely want to go with tempered steel. The gears is pretty simple. You gotta go with the damage gear, and the supercharged gear is very underrated on Nani. But if you want more health, you can definitely go with the shield gear and the damage gear. Next up, we got Edgar. It's very dependent on what you want. If you want to go on and keep getting kills fast and ending the game fast, you definitely want to go with Let's Fly. But if you want to be smart, you gotta go with hardcore. You gotta wait for your super to get charged and your hyper charge, and then you just go in with this gadget. Next up, we got fisticuffs. You gotta go with fisticuffs, but there are moments where you definitely need to go with hard landing to confirm the kills. So it really does depend on what you want. Do you want more health, or do you want to deal damage instantly and then deal more damage over time? Next up, for his gears, you gotta go with the damage gear or the shield gear, but you can also go with the shield gear and the gadget charge gear. It really does depend on you. Next up, you have to go with piggy banks every single time. Even there, if there's barely any walls, you have to destroy those walls. But if there's no walls at all, then you can definitely go with the coin shower. Next up, for the star power, it really does depend nowadays, because Griff's unload speed, or not unload speed, like when it reaches it, it's so slow. Like it's really so slow at all. So it does depend on what you want. I use keep the change nowadays, but if you want, you can still use business resilience. But I do recommend you using keep the change. And next up, we got his gears. His gears, definitely want to go with the damage and reload gear. Next up, we got Grom. For Grom, if it's a bushy map, you have to go with Watchtower. But if it's not a bushy map, you have to go with Radio Check. And you have to go with the X Factor star power, because this is useless. Why do you want to keep your super? The super is the most important part, and you want to use it as fast as possible so you can get more supers over time. So you definitely want to go with X Factors. Obviously, for most of the throwers, you gotta go with the damage and shield gear. Next up, we got Bonnie. For Bonnie, it's pretty simple. You have to go with the Sugar Rush gadget. This is kind of, underrated gadget, but for now, you have to go with Sugar Rush. You have to go with Black Powder, obviously. And here it really does depend. All of these are really good for Bonnie right now. The health gear to get more health, supercharge gear to get you super faster, the gadget charge gear because this is a really good gadget for Bonnie. So it really does depend. I use the gadget charge gear and the damage gear in most case scenarios, but it really does depend on you. That's what I think. Next up, we got Gale. With Gale, it's pretty simple, honest. If you're facing against tanks and Edgars, crows jumping on you, you gotta go with Twister. But if there's no tanks and you wanna jump like in Heist in Kaboom Canyon, then you definitely want to use Spring Injector. You obviously need to use Blustering Blow if there's a lot of walls, but if there's no walls at all or there's barely any walls, definitely want to go with Freezing Snow. The gear is pretty simple, damage and shield gear. Next up, we got Colette. For Colette, this is a very simple one. You gotta go with Gotcha. Even if there's no tanks in the team, you have to go with Gotcha gadget. And for the star power, well, if it's Heist, then you definitely want to go with Max Stacks. But if you're playing in Brawl Ball and Hot Zone, and if there are tanks, even one tank or one assassin, then you definitely want to go with Push It. And the gears are very simple. You gotta go with the damage gear and you gotta go with the gadget charge gear because that health gadget from Colette is really good. Next up, we got Belle. For Belle, it really doesn't have any importance at all. But if you want to get a cheeky kill or a cheeky shot to get you super faster, then you definitely want to go with this gadget. But if you're playing Bounty and the enemies don't really see the nest egg, then you definitely want to go with this. For the star power, you have to go with positive feedback. But if you're facing against assassins, Grounded is not actually a bad star power at all. And for the gears, it really does depend really. I use the damage and reload gear, but you definitely need the shield against Pipers and Nanis and Byrons. So you're definitely going to go with the shield and damage gear. Maybe you can also go with the shield and reload gear. Next up, we got my main brawler, Ash. You obviously want to go with the chill pill. Rotten Banana is actually good. I've seen a lot of pros use it, but without chill pill, I wouldn't have gotten so many kills and so many supers and hypercharges. So I do recommend you using chill pill because Rotten Banana, yes, you really want to get the rage at the first second of the game, but if you're a good Ash main or if you're just good Ash in general, you can definitely get that rage soon. But the chill pill is really important for you. Obviously, you gotta go with the first bash star power. And for the gears, if it's a bushy map, even a little bushy, it's important to go with the speed gear and damage gear. But if there's not many bushy maps and it's not important to use speed gear, or if there's no bushy maps at all, They definitely going to go with the health gear and damage gear. Next up we got Lola. For Lola, it's pretty simple. You gotta go with the freeze frame, gadget, because it's very important for her. But in maps that are like you need to switch lanes as soon as possible, like bridge to farm, you're definitely gonna want to go with stun double. And for improvise, you need to use it in heist, but if it's not really heist like hot zone or even brawl ball, you definitely want to go with seal with the kiss. And obviously the best one for Lola is going to be the damage gear and reload gear. Next up is definitely Sam. For Sam, you have to go with magnetism field or whatever it's called. This is definitely the best gadget by far for Sam. It brings the enemies closer to you, so you can easily get the kill and finish off the kill, or your teammates can finish the kill off. You have to go with Hardy recovery, because without this, Sam is absolutely useless. You need that HP to gain HP and to maybe try and get a push and kill an enemy. And obviously you have to go with the damage gear and the health gear for Sam. Next up we got Mandy. For Mandy, it really does depend. If there's a lot of walls, if you want to get a kill that behind an enemy and the enemies are behind the wall and he has less HP, you want to go with Cookie Crumbs. But if no walls at all, barely any walls, you definitely want to go with Caramelize. Obviously you have to go with In My Sights for Mandy. Mandy's shots are way too slow without this. You gotta go with the damage gear and shield gear for Mandy. For Maisie has been an underrated brawler in the meta so far. I do think she's like top 5 most underrated brawler in brawlers right now. You definitely want to go with this gadget. You also want to go with this star power right here. And the gear is obviously damage gear and extra gadget charge gear. And next up we got Hank, the milkman himself. You obviously want to go with this shield gadget, because without this, Hank is just not that good at all. Back in the day, this used to be useful, but I can't really get the shot off before the enemy just escaping, so you definitely want to go with this one. Obviously you gotta go with It's Gonna Blow, because getting that extra movement speed can get you the confirmed kills and damage. In my opinion, this is the best one, and the other one is just absolutely useless. For the gears, damage gear and health gear is so important to Hank in the meta. For Pearl, another underrated brawler right now, slowly creeping up to the A tier, S tier. You definitely want to go with Overcooked, because this is the reason why Pearl is so good right now. And you obviously want to go with Heat Shield. This doesn't really do that much at all. This, you get a lot of pressure, because the enemies just know that you have so much HP and you deal a lot of damage. For the gears, you gotta go with the damage gear and the extra gadget charge gear. Next up we got Larry and Laurie himself, Mr. S tier since his release. Obviously you want to go with this one, the order fallback gadget, because you get so much HP and you can easily get sneaky kills by switching Larry and Laurie. Next up, if you're facing against assassins, even if it's heist or brawler or wherever, tanks or assassins, you definitely want to go with this one. If there's not really any tanks or assassins, then you definitely want to go with this one. For the gears, it's pretty simple, damage and shield gear. For Angelo, you gotta go with Stinging Flight. But if there's a lot of walls and you want to get a cheeky little hit or kill, you definitely gonna want to go with Master Fletcher. Obviously, if there's even a little bit of water or a lot of water, then you definitely gonna want to go with Flow. But if there's not really much water at all, then you definitely want to go with Empower. Gears gotta be damage gear and gadget charge gear. For Barry right now is really good in the meta ever since he got a cyber charge. Obviously, if it's in heist, you definitely gonna want to go with this one. But if it's not heist, you have to go with Friendship is great. The best star power in Brawl Stars, like top 5 at least, is this one. Flower is fine, really important for Barry, because Barry's reload speed is really not that great at all. With this, he has a really good reload speed, so obviously I want to go with this one. The gears are pretty simple. You want to go with damage or shield gear, but if you really need more gadgets, then you definitely want to go with the gadget charge gear or shield gear, or the damage gear and the gadget charge gear. For Shade, brawler that's pretty overrated in Brawl Stars right now. I knew he wasn't gonna be a really great brawler in Brawl Stars. I even made a short, as you can see it from this video right here, short right here. Obviously, you want to go with Long Arms, the best one by far. You need to get the first super as soon as possible, so you definitely want to go with the Long Arms. You also really need to go with Hardened Hoodie, because once you use that super, you're obviously gonna go as aggro as possible. And for the gears, you have to go with the damage gear and gadget charge gear. For Mortis, I'm not really a Mortis main a lot at all, or I don't really play Mortis not that much, but from what I saw, everyone plays survival, shovel, and coil snake, and people use damage gear and the bad storm gear, mythic gear. So if you want to go with that, you can definitely go with that. For Tara, you gotta go with support from beyond, but if it's a bushy map, like of course Snake Prairie, you definitely want to go with this one. And for the gears, you have to go with the healing shade. It's really good. The other one is good, but this one is even better. If it's a bushy map, you want to go with speed gear or pet power gear or speed gear and damage gear. If it's not a bushy map, you definitely want to go with the damage gear and pet power gear. And we got Jean. For Jean, if you're facing against an aggro brawler, then you definitely want to go with Lamp Blowout. But if it's no aggro brawlers, and if it's a long range brawl map, you definitely want to go with Vengeful Spirits. If it's solo showdown, you gotta go with this one, but if it's definitely not solo showdown, you gotta go with Magic Puffs. And for Jean, it really does depend. All of these are really good for Jean. If it's a bushy map, you want to go with speed and vision gear, especially if it's a lot of bushy maps, a lot of bush in the map. But if there's no bushes at all, or barely any bushes, you gotta go with the damage gear and the mythic gear. Next up, we got Max. Max is a really good brawler in the meta right now, like top 5, top 10, top 15. You definitely want to go with the phase shifter and run and gun with the damage gear and the shield gear. For Mr. P, you have to go with server spell. This one, ever since it got nerfed like a long time ago, it hasn't really been that great at all. Obviously, if you want to control and if the brawlers that are, you know, the enemies are like Byron, Bell, or one-shot brawlers, you definitely want to go with this. But most case scenario, you definitely want to go with Service Bell. You obviously have to go with reload, whatever it's called, revolving door. But I've seen pros use this when they play Mr. P, getting that extra damage every 4 seconds. But most case scenario, you definitely want to go with this. For the gears, you gotta go with the damage gear and pet power gear. For Sprout, this is a very hard one because both of Sprout's builds are really good in Brawl Stars. So if there's a lot of bushes, you definitely want to go with Garden Mulcher and, you know, this one. But if there is not really much bushes at all, you definitely want to go with Transplant and Overgrowth. The gears are, you want to go with Supercharged gear or Shield gear or Damage gear or Shield gear. But if there's no really like brawlers like Piper or even aggressive brawlers, you definitely want to go with Damage gear and Supercharged gear. For Byron, you have to go with booster shots. You want to get your super faster, obviously, so this is the one to go. You have to go with melees so they don't heal as much, and the damage gear and the shield gear. And next up, we got Squeak. For Squeak, even if it's not a bushy map, you have to go with residue. If you get a hit with this with an enemy, then you can easily confirm the kill. You obviously have to go with chain reaction to do more damage. And if it's a bushy map, you definitely want to go with speed gear and gadget charge gear, or speed gear or damage gear. But if it's not a bushy map, damage gear and the gadget charge gear to go. For Lou, ever since he got that reload speed buff, he has been really good in the meta. He is back in the hot zone maps and meta. So you definitely want to go with cryo syrup and hyperthermia, I think it is. So yeah, and speed and not speed, supercharge gear and damage gear. And for roughs, you gotta go with air support. But if they're playing, the enemies who are playing Piper, you know, Bell, stuff like that, you gotta go with take cover. For the gear, for the gadget, star power, sorry, it's pretty simple. If there's a lot of walls, or if there's any walls you wanna break, you gotta go with this. But if it's, you know, knockout you're playing, then you can definitely go with field promotion. For the gears, it's pretty simple. You gotta go with the damage gear and shield gear. Next up, for Buzz, you gotta go with reserve boy most of the time to at least get a kill or to get more control. But if it's a bushy map, then you can definitely go with X-ray shades. And for star power, if there's a lot of walls, you can definitely go with this one. But if it's not many walls, then you can definitely go with the eyes sharp. For the gears, if it's a bushy map, speed gear, damage gear. But if it's not a bushy map, health and damage gear. Next up, we got Fang. For Fang, you gotta go with the roundhouse kick. But if you're playing maps and modes like, you know, like hot zone, maybe gem grab that you want control of, you gotta go with the corn fu. And obviously, it's always Divine Souls. Back in the days it used to be Fresh Kicks, but now it has to be Divine Souls. For the gears, gotta go with the Gadget Charge gear and the Damage gear, even if it's a pushing map. For Eve, ever since Eve got the Hypercharge, she has been slowly creeping up the meta more and more, and she's definitely back in the highest metas, in the metas that she had, there was a lot of water. You gotta go with the Gadget and also Unnatural Order Star Power. For the gears, it really does depend. Really, if you want the reload, get more reload. If you want damage, for more damage, but you have to have this one, the Mythic gear with the Hypercharge. It's so broken. So yeah, that's for that. Now for Janet, again another brawler that's slowly creeping up the meta because of the new Hypercharge. You gotta go drop the base, even if there's no grass. You don't want them to heal at all, so you gotta go with this one. You gotta go with Vocal Warm Up and the Gadget, not the Gadget Charge gear, the Damage gear and the Shield gear. For Otis, another underrated brawler slowly creeping up into the meta. You gotta go with Fast Splatter to get more control over that area and maybe even confirm a kill. You gotta go with Ink Fields, and if it's a bushy map, you can definitely go with the Speed gear and the Damage gear. If you're facing off against brawlers that have a lot of damage, you can definitely go with the Damage gear and Shield gear. But if you're facing off against tanks, which you're using Otis to face off against tanks, you can definitely go with the Damage gear and the Supercharge gear to get your Hypercharge sooner. For Buster, this is gonna be very easy. Slow-mo replay, Kevlar vest, the Gadget Charge gear and the Damage gear. But if it's a bushy map, you can definitely go with the Speed gear and the Gadget Charge gear, or Speed gear and the Damage gear. Next up for Gray, another really good brawler because of the Hypercharge. A lot of these brawlers are really good because of the Hypercharge. You have to go with Walking Cane to confirm kills, to break open the map. Very simple as that. You gotta go with this one to get, more and more health and HP every time you use that Gray Porter. And you gotta go with the Damage gear and the Shield gear for Gray. For RT, if you're facing off against low HP brawlers, you gotta go with hacks. But if you're facing off against assassins and tanks, you gotta go with out of the line. You gotta obviously go with quick mats and health gear and damage gear. For Willow, this is gonna be very simple. You gotta go with dives every single time. If it's against assassins or tanks, you gotta go with this. But if it's not assassins or anything like that, you can definitely go with this one. You have to go with Love is Blind and the damage gear and shield gear for her. For Dog, very simple, extra mustard every time of the way. But if you're using Dog to heal your teammates every single time, then you can definitely go with double sausage. And for Dog, you gotta go with self-service because it's very important, and damage gear and extra charge gadget gear. For Chalk, you really use Chalk in heist and maybe in hot zone, so you gotta go with ghost trains if you want to go through walls. And if you're playing in hot zone, then you definitely want to go with pit stop. But if you're playing in safe zone, you definitely want to go with tickets, please. But in the rest, you gotta want to go with pit stop, damage gear and the health gear for Chuck. For Charlie, is very simple. You gotta go with the spiders, you gotta go with the digestive, and you also gotta go with the damage gear and gadget charge gear. For Miko, another ball that's fallen off even with the hypercharge, you gotta go with clipping scream to slow the enemies down, get some damage, and also confirm the kill. You gotta go with monkey business all the way. But if you're playing in heist, you definitely want to go with record smash. The gears are pretty simple, damage gear and shield gear. For Melody, a brawler that's really broken in the meta right now because of the hypercharge, you gotta go with this one, interlude and fast beats, and the damage gear and extra gadget charge gear, because the hypercharge actually stacks with the fast beats and interlude, so you get so much more shield, so much more fast mobility, and you can easily get the kills. For Lily, you gotta go with the vanish gadget, you gotta go with spiky, and you gotta go with the damage gear and extra gadget charge gear. And next up we got Clancy, a brawler that's slowly falling off the meta. He's still there in B tier, high B tier, low A tier, but slowly falling off. You gotta go with snappy shooting. I've seen pros use this one, but I do recommend you using snappy shooting to get that flipping level 3rd. Without the level 3rd, Clancy is so bad. You gotta go with recon obviously, and the damage gear and gadget gear. And for Mo has definitely fallen off the meta. He's still in C tier, B tier, so you definitely want to go with this one right here. more speed, you want to get the super faster. You also want to go with skipping stones and damage gear and shield gear. For Juju ever since she got released has been in the top 5 of the meta ever since she got released. People are actually underrating her a lot because I do think she's like top 2, top 3 best brawler in Brawl Stars right now. So you obviously want to go with Voodoo Chill. But if there's bushy maps, especially as there's this one strategy right now in auto play, auto in the open, you definitely want to go with this one, and you go in the grass, and then while the enemies are shooting, you go on, sneak in and shoot 3 ammos and they're dead, because Juju does 2000 damage each ammo. So you definitely want to also go with this if there's a lot of grassy maps. If it's not grassy maps, you definitely want to go with this one. Obviously you gotta go with this one to slow the enemies down. Every shot Griggy does, Gris or whatever its name is, damage gear and the shield gear obviously. And for Spike, you definitely gonna want to go with life plant, but if it's heist and you get lucky in the heist, you definitely want to go with popping pin cushion, but I still recommend you going with life plant. And for Spike, you obviously need to go with curveball every single time. But if you're playing in a map that doesn't have too much has a lot of walls, like triple, you definitely could go with fertilize to get more HP. And for the gears, you gotta go the damage gear and the mythic gear, or mythic gear or shield gear. And next up for Crow, if you are playing in heist and you want to use the hypercharge and go in the save, you can definitely go with defense boosters. But if you're playing in like knockout or like bounty, you definitely want to go with slowing toxin. You still need to go with carrying Crow and the mythic gear and shield gear, or the damage gear and mythic gear. Next up we got Leon. You have to go with lollipop drop and invisa heal with the damage gear and the mythic gear. Next up we got Sandy. You have to go with this sweet dreams gadget to confirm, not just confirm kills by stunning them, but trying to score a goal, or in hockey you want to score a goal, you can stun them and then shoot the ball. Next up for the star power, you gotta go with rude stance so they don't heal when they're in the Sandy super. And for the gears, you gotta go with speed gear and damage gear. But if there is no bushy maps at all, or bushes at all in the map you're playing with Sandy, then you definitely want to go with the gadget charge gear and the damage gear. For Amber, it's pretty simple. You gotta go with dancing flames every single time. But if they're not playing any assassins or tanks, you can definitely go with fire starter. You gotta go with wild flames obviously, with the reload gear and damage gear. For Meg, every single time you gotta go with jolting volts. But if you're playing Meg in knockout or pipe or bounty, and you're a Piper shard you can tank with the tooling box gadget, you can definitely go do that. But if you're facing against assassins, you definitely want to go with heavy metal. But if there's no assassins or tanks, you can definitely go with force field. The gears for Meg is very simple: health gear and damage gear. For Surge, you have to go with the power shield gadget every single time. But if it's a map that's a long range and you can't get the super, then you can definitely go with power surge. You obviously need to go with the serve ice cold. But if you're playing Surge in solo showdown, you can definitely go to the max. If it's a bushy map, speed gear and damage gear is the way to go, or speed gear, shield gear. But if it's not a bushy map, damage gear and shield gear is the way to go. For Chester, you gotta go with the candy beans. I don't even know what this even does. You gotta always go with the candy beans. Star power. You also have to go with single belt mania, because this one needs a rework. Everyone is saying this sneak peek star power needs a rework. I don't know why Brawl Stars are not reworking this star power. You obviously want to go with the damage gear and the shield gear. For Cordelius, you definitely want to go with the poison mushroom and this mushroom kingdom with the damage gear and shield gear. For Kit, if you're playing Kit in a cheesy strategy, you can definitely go with cheeseburger and overly attached. But if you're not really doing that, or you need the super faster, you can definitely go with the cardboard. You still need to play overly attached, but if it's solo showdown, you can definitely go with power hungry. And for gears, damage gear and gadget gear if you're playing in brawl ball or knockout. But I still recommend you using the shield gear and damage gear if you're playing in bounty. For Draco, you have to go with the last stand gadget and shredding star power to get more heals with the gadget charge gear and the damage gear. And the last one in this one in the legendary section, you gotta go with the healing gadget for Kenji, and the shield star power for Kenji, and the damage gear and extra gadget charge gear. And the last but not least, we got Meepo. Hasn't even been released by the time I'm recording this. There's a glitch right now that Meepo has not been released so far, so you have to go with the mansions of Meepo. I've seen, you know, the sneak peeks and stuff like that. This is absolutely broken. For the star power, it really does depend on what you want. If you want to do more damage, you can definitely go do not pass go. If you want more reload speed for your teammates, you can definitely go rule bending. This is completely up to you. You definitely want to go with the damage gear and the shield gear, but since the gadget was really busted, you definitely want to go with damage, gadget charge, and the shield. You have at least these three. And that is the end of the video, guys. If you guys enjoyed this type of video, you want me to make more of this, please like the video. Please make sure you subscribe, as I'm really close to 600 subscribers. Join the Discord server, it's in the link down below, so you can participate in future videos. And this is the end of the video. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.